A young black man dressed in a pressed shirt and slacks is thrown against the hood of his car by two officers under the blaring sun of downtown Atlanta. The heat burns through his shirt as he winces in pain, his breath catching in his chest. He cries out, "What did I do?" His voice, filled with confusion and desperation, is drowned out by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut and the murmurs of an onlooking crowd. Marcel Carter, a 28-year-old software engineer, has spent years climbing the ladder at a leading tech company. Today, he is riding high after receiving news of his long-awaited promotion. Marcel's sunny demeanor reflects his optimism and the respect he's earned in his community, a small but tight-knit neighborhood in Atlanta where everyone knows his name. At lunch, Marcel makes his usual stop at a bustling convenience store. The air inside is thick with the aroma of fresh coffee and the hum of conversations. Marcel greets the cashier, Mrs. Jenkins, a grandmotherly figure who has known him since he was a child. "You're looking sharp today, Marcel," she says warmly, handing him his receipt. He smiles back, saying, "Big day, Mrs. Jenkins, big day." As Marcel steps out into the blinding sunlight, the hum of the city surrounds him. He's halfway to his car when two police officers, Officer Reynolds and Officer Dobbs, call out to him. Their stern faces betray no explanation, only suspicion. "Sir, we need to see your ID," Reynolds demands, his tone clipped and authoritative. Marcel hesitates for a moment, his brow furrowing. "Sure, officer," he replies, pulling his wallet out and handing over his ID. "What's this about?" Marcel asks, his voice steady but cautious. Reynolds glances at Dobbs before responding. "You match the description of a robbery suspect." Marcel's face tightens with disbelief. "Robbery? Officer, there's been some mistake. I just came from work." The tension thickens as the officers exchange skeptical looks. Marcel, still calm, raises his hand slightly to show he means no harm. "Please check the description again," he pleads, his voice tinged with urgency. But Reynolds' patience wears thin. "Turn around," he orders sharply. Marcel freezes. "I haven't done anything wrong," he says, his voice cracking slightly. Dobbs grabs his arm, twisting it behind his back as Reynolds snaps the handcuffs into place. The rough metal bites into his wrists. Around them, a crowd begins to form. "This is wrong!" a woman's voice shouts from the sidewalk. Several bystanders pull out their phones, recording the scene. One man yells, "That's not the guy! Let him go!" But the officers ignore the growing protests. Marcel is silent now, his face etched with a mix of humiliation and quiet fury. His mind races. What will my boss think? What will Tasha think? How did it come to this? The screen lingers on Marcel as he sits in the back of the police car, his hands trembling against the cold steel of the handcuffs. His phone buzzes in his pocket, unreachable. The missed calls from his boss, his mother, and his fiancée, Tasha, flash on the screen. The weight of the moment crashes down on him. For a man who's always played by the rules, the sheer injustice of the situation feels suffocating. Marcel stares out the window as the city blurs past, his mind replaying the events in agonizing detail. I did everything right. I've worked so hard. Why am I here? His thoughts shift to Tasha, her smile, her unwavering belief in him. The thought of her seeing him like this twists a knife in his chest. As crowd disperse outside the convenience store, their faces a mix of outrage and helplessness. Mrs. Jenkins watches from the doorway, clutching her apron. Her lips press into a thin line as she mutters, "This isn't right." Not Marcel. The bystander videos begin circulating online. The hashtags Justice for Marcel and Stop Racial Profiling gaining traction within hours. Back in the police car, Marcel closes his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. But the shame and fear won't let him go. Will anyone believe me? Marcel is taken to a police precinct, where he is interrogated for hours without legal representation. Despite his protests, the officers insist he matches the suspect's description. The fluorescent lights above buzz incessantly, casting a harsh glare on Marcel as he sits at the metal table. Every question feels like an accusation, every pause a silent judgment. Marcel's voice grows hoarse as he repeatedly declares his innocence. His mind flickers to the bystanders who recorded the arrest, a small spark of hope amid the oppressive weight of his situation. Meanwhile, Tasha is a whirlwind of determination. She's angry, but her fury fuels her resolve to clear Marcel's name. After countless phone calls, she manages to reach Jordan Hayes, a high-profile civil rights attorney. Jordan listens intently as Tasha recounts the events, her voice cracking with emotion. "This isn't just about Marcel," Jordan says firmly. "This is about a system that needs to be held accountable." Jordan dives headfirst into the case, her sharp mind dissecting every detail. She reviews the bystander footage frame by frame, her jaw tightening as the officer's actions come into focus. She meets with Marcel's colleagues, family, and neighbors, gathering testimony that paints a clear picture of his character. A man who's never so much as jaywalked, let alone committed a robbery. The community rallies behind Marcel. Mrs. Jenkins, the cashier from the convenience store, spearheads a peaceful protest outside the precinct. Dozens gather holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcel" and "Stop Racial Profiling." The atmosphere is charged with both anger and solidarity. Local news outlets pick up the story, amplifying the voices of those demanding justice. Jordan's relentless pursuit of the truth uncovers a critical piece of evidence. The actual robbery suspect had been arrested in another part of the city just 30 minutes after Marcel's arrest. This discovery, paired with the racial profiling caught on video, solidifies the case for Marcel's innocence. Marcel, though still shaken, begins to feel the faint stirrings of hope. He's touched by the outpouring of support from his community and buoyed by Jordan's confidence. Sitting across from her during a meeting, he finally allows himself a small smile. "Thank you," he says quietly. Jordan places a hand on his, her gaze steady. "We're going to make this right." The climax unfolds in a packed courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Jordan stands tall and poised, her voice steady as she delivers a fiery opening statement. She doesn't just recount the events of Marcel's arrest, she lays bare the systemic prejudice that allowed it to happen. Her words cut through the courtroom like a knife, and the jury hangs on to every syllable. "This case isn't just about one man," she says, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It's about holding those in power accountable for their actions." The turning point comes when the officer's body cam footage is played. The dismissive tone, the unnecessary aggression, the outright hostility. It's all there, undeniable and raw. Audible gasps ripple through the audience as the footage unfolds. Even the judge's expression hardens, a flicker of disapproval crossing his face. The video captures more than just the actions of the officers. It reveals the cracks in a system that failed Marcel from the start. The prosecution scrambles to defend the officers, claiming they acted in good faith based on the suspect's description. But Jordan is relentless. She points out glaring inconsistencies in the police report, emphasizing the vague description that could have matched countless individuals. She highlights Marcel's spotless record, his role in the community, and the absurdity of the accusation. "Good faith," she says, her voice sharp, "doesn't excuse bad policing." When Marcel takes the stand, the room falls silent. He looks composed, but there's a heaviness in his eyes. He speaks with quiet strength, recounting how the incident shattered his sense of security and dignity. "I've worked my whole life to be seen for who I am," he says, his voice steady but tinged with pain. "But in those moments, I was reduced to a suspect, to a threat, and no matter what I said, it didn't matter." His words hang in the air, heavy and unshakable. Even the most stoic faces in the jury show signs of cracking. The courtroom feels like it's holding its breath. Tasha's testimony follows. Her voice trembles at first, but she finds her strength as she describes the emotional toll the ordeal has taken on their relationship. "Marcel has always been my rock," she says, tears welling in her eyes. "But after that day, I saw how broken he felt. It's something you can't just forget." Her words bring a human depth to the story, making it impossible for anyone to ignore the ripple effects of the injustice. The jury deliberates for hours, each passing moment adding to the suspense. Marcel sits with Tasha by his side, his hands clenched tightly together. Jordan watches from across the room, her sharp eyes betraying none of the nerves she feels inside. When the jury finally returns, the courtroom falls into a hush. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty on all charges," the foreperson announces. The words hang in the air for a moment before the room erupts in applause. Relief floods Marcel's face as he collapses into Tasha's arms. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, he can breathe freely. But the verdict doesn't stop there. The officers are found guilty of misconduct, a rare but significant victory. Their expressions of indifference have been replaced by discomfort as they stand to face the consequences of their actions. In the days that follow, Marcel begins to rebuild his life. The police department, under immense public pressure, announces new training programs aimed at addressing racial bias. Officer Reynolds and Officer Dobbs are terminated, their actions serving as a stark warning to others. Marcel, however, isn't content to simply move on. He uses his platform to become an advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking at community events and partnering with organizations to push for lasting change. His story, once a tale of despair, becomes a beacon of hope for others. As Marcel and Tasha walk through their neighborhood hand-in-hand, children wave. Neighbors nod warmly, and Mrs. Jenkins beams at them from her porch. The air feels lighter, filled with a sense of renewal. As they turn a corner, the screen fades to black, and the words appear, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Martin Luther King, Jr.